Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rev Rx Podcast, where we discuss how to thrive in faith, family, and health. My name is Chad Potts, and I'm your host. Today's special guest has an incredible story. You see, Logan Hufford was stuck in a place of total darkness and destruction. We've talked in past episodes about addiction. And usually when we think about addiction, we think about things like drugs, alcohol, substances. But today we're going to talk about addiction of a different kind. One that we don't really like to talk about a whole lot, but one which is very real and a lot more prevalent than we think. We're going to talk about sexual addiction. You see, Logan, in his story, he shares with us how he was addicted to not just pornography, but actually how that started a cycle where he was actually having affairs. He was unfaithful to his wife, and he was in a place where he was given an ultimatum, change or else. And what he found, the person he found at the end of that journey, was Christ. You see, through a Christ-centered recovery journey, Logan was able to step out of the darkness into light and really begin to step into his fullness and his full potential as a man. And today he's committed to sharing his story with as many people as will listen about sexual addiction, how real it is, and how we can be transformed, we can be delivered from that, and how Jesus is at the very center of that story. You're going to want to watch from beginning to end as Logan shares with us not only his captivating story, but the things he learned along the way and the advice he has today to those who may be stuck in a similar place or who may know others who are. I'm going to give some links in the show notes of this episode. So if you're struggling with these sort of things, I would encourage you to reach out. Also, feel free to reach out to Logan. I'm going to have his contact information or myself. We'd love to come alongside you and help you break free. Without further ado, I introduce to you my friend, Logan Hufford. Thank you so much, Logan, for joining us today on the Rev Rx Podcast, man. What a privilege to have you here today.
Thanks, Chad. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for letting me dive in.
Yeah, sure. So I'd love to give you an opportunity to just share your story with us. Your story is one that is unique. Of course, everyone's is. Everyone has a story. But it's one that I think really has the potential to help other people, to unlock others that may be stuck in their own bondage, to really free them to pursue the purpose of their life. One of the things I like to do with my coaching and with this podcast is to show people what it looks like to thrive in life. And then part of doing that is showing some of the obstacles that keep us from that. And today we're going to talk about that with your story and kind of what you're doing in the world today to help others. So wherever you want to jump in, man, I'd just love to hear what the Lord's done in your life.
Yeah, got married young. I was 20 years old. Had our first kid 11 months later. So me as a 20, 21, 22, me as an early to mid 20s dad, we have 4 kids, and we have 4 kids in 5 years. Dad as a husband, always have believed in God, always have gone to church and have valued Christianity, which might sound like a weird statement, but I'll explain that. Valued Christianity, valued belief in God, valued the Bible. You talked about thriving. Thriving was not even a part of my thinking because I hated my existence.
Wow.
So there was no part of me that was wondering if I would be able to thrive because that was just so far outside reality.
Gotcha.
I was a raging sex addict for years. That started with porn. It started with, I call it my introduction to porn. It wasn't what the world would consider porn. It was, as a kid, what was available to me was looking at lingerie and bikini photos in a JCPenney catalog.
Gotcha.
That's what was available. There's no Playboy. This is the late 90s. There were no smartphones later on. So that's the first time I sexually objectified pictures of women.
Right.
So starting there, and I went from there to, as a dad, as a husband, having affair after affair. Of course, there's a chasm in between that time,
Right.
And what that was just me starting from porn, training myself to chase after new and different, training myself to chase after the high that came from getting whatever sexual excitement I was chasing after, whether that was porn, whether that was flirting with a woman, getting that text back, getting the attention. And so again, going back to that, me as a young dad, as a young husband, continually cheating, whether that was through sexual affairs, cheating through porn, cheating through inappropriate texting conversations, all of that. I hated that I was a husband, not because I didn't love Carrie, my wife. I hated that she had me. I hated that I was a dad, not because I didn't love my boys. I hated that they had me. I hated that I was alive. I wasn't angry at God, but I remember asking him, why would you create me? I'm a monster. All I do is hurt everyone around me. Why would you put me on this earth?
Wow.
I didn't understand why God would put me on this earth. And so I lived in that space in hopelessness and despair, for years, and God brought me out of that, not with the flip of a switch, not with just turning a button off. I wanted that, I always emphasize, like, I thought I wanted healing. What I really wanted was just to not suffer anymore, because healing takes work and healing takes time. Right. And I really didn't want to put in work and time. I just didn't want to have this lifestyle anymore.
Sure.
God did bring that healing, but it came through his way, not the way I wanted. I know that's jumping around, and that's a super aerial view. We can zoom in, wherever you like, but I felt led to start there in that despair and that hopelessness, because everything that I do now, everything that the last 8 years has been, everything that my life is, for me at least, it's juxtaposed against the despair and the darkness of what the life was before.
Yeah.
The beauty of what God has created now just shines even more.
Well, and it's the beauty of what the Bible describes as a new creation. And so you have that, like you said, that juxtaposition of the despair, the hopelessness, the darkness. And then God transformed you. And yes, you're right. A lot of times we want immediate answers. Can God do that? Sure. He's God. He can do anything.
Right.
But oftentimes it takes work and time, like you said. But you just wanted relief from what you were feeling. You wanted, relief from the suffering that was caused by, this addiction, by your lifestyle. And you found it. And you found it over time. You found it through healing. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper. But I want to cycle back a little bit and talk about, you'd mentioned, what was your phrase that you said about Christianity? You valued Christianity.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Because you said that was a unique phrase, and I keyed in on that.
Maybe it doesn't sound weird in the sense of, like, valued Christianity. To me, that doesn't sound like somebody that knows God, right? That sounds like somebody that has a head knowledge, and ultimately, I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
Was like it. I've never had a day in my life where I didn't believe that God was real. I've never had a day in my life that I didn't believe Jesus died on the cross, that Satan is real, that heaven and hell are real. Like, I've always believed those things to be true.
Sure.
And there were times I was raised going to church. I was not just going to church because it was like the cultural thing to do, but like going to church and living in a family that, not perfect, but it was a healthy infrastructure, and
part of your life.
Christianity was a part of our life. So those were things that were very ingrained in me in a good way. Belief in those things to be true. And I prayed my version of the sinner's prayer as a kid, and I got baptized, and then I did it again a couple of years later. Because it was like, I guess that didn't take, so I don't remember what ages those were. Maybe it was like 8 and then 10, or 10 and then 12, or something like that.
Gotcha.
But I mean, never felt like I was a Christian. Never felt like it was real. Always doubted my salvation. Was so scared to death of where I would go if I died.
Mm.
And initially as a kid, I remember feeling those things. And then as I got a little bit older, then it was like, well, obviously if I'm acting like this, there's no way I'm a Christian. Like a Christian
Gotcha.
wouldn't do these things.
Wow.
I succumbed to this feeling as an adult of maybe, best case scenario, maybe I can be the thief on the cross.
Mm.
Maybe on my deathbed, I can be like, God, I'm really, truly sorry. Please forgive me. And then, I won't have a chance to ever do these things again. So then I'll get to go to heaven. I mean, that was where my thinking was at.
Wow.
I remember my prodigal son moment, like in terms of like a season of life, because I grew up in a very, very like Christ-centered greenhouse environment. Baby of 5, both parents raised me, all these things. Went down to Houston, Texas from Alaska. Went down to Houston, worked there for a summer, and basically just tried to do all the things that I couldn't do beforehand. So I'm 18 years old down there in this big city, right? I still went to church almost every single Sunday. And I had to work to get there. It was not close. I had to get a ride. I had to arrange these things. And I wasn't doing it to impress anyone because nobody, my family wasn't down there. The people I was working with, they weren't going to church. I did it, honestly, because I felt the darkness of what I was doing, even though I wanted to do it. But I felt dirty. I felt, the conscience aspect of it, conscience. And yet it was like, I don't, even at that point, I'm like, I don't know if I'll be able to have a relationship with Christ, but let me be close to people that have a relationship with Christ. So when I say like I valued Christianity, that's kind of what I mean. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if I can have it, but I know it's real. I want to be around people that have it.
Yeah, I relate to that so much. And I was thinking that's probably what you meant. A lot of my life, a lot of my adult life, I spent, just kind of going through the motions. I was raised in church, same way. I had certain expectations that I had of what it looked like to be a Christian. And for a lot of my life, that meant going to church. I mean, that was about it. You check the box, you're around those people. And even as I began to make money, all right, I tithe, I'm in good standing. And, it was all very exterior for me. And I like that term, valued Christianity. I valued it. I believed it, but it wasn't real to me. Yeah. It wasn't personal to me at that period of time. And so I get what you're saying for sure. So, you go through this period of time. And one of the things you said is that surely you couldn't be a Christian if you were acting this way.
Right. And
for you, that led you to think, all right, well, I know I'm not doing right, but I'm just going to go be around those that, maybe it'll rub off on me. Yep. But for some, and I've seen this a lot, it's like, all right, well, I better straighten up. And so they began to jump through these physical outward hoops, and then following Christ becomes something that was never intended to be. It becomes legalism. And so we have to balance that, I think. And, we all deal with that. What does it look like to be a follower of Jesus? And that's interesting that you brought that up. So then, you mentioned that you had these, you were introduced at a young age, and it wasn't to like hardcore porn. Right. We're talking these magazines that come into the mail, right? Nowadays, you don't even have to look for it to find it.
Yep.
I remember when our kids were really young, we were at the beach and going down the road, we were driving to dinner, and there was this big billboard. And I believe the billboard was for some sort of club or something, gentleman's club or whatnot. But the lady on the billboard was just like almost naked. And I'm like, that's like for everyone to see.
Right.
My kids are in the car. They're looking out and they're seeing this. I'm like, man, you don't even have to look for it.
Yeah, it's Amazon Prime, a commercial pops up for some show, and
it's everywhere. And so we can't let the kids watch YouTube these days because you have the ads that pop up, and it's like, well, nope, that ruined that for us. So it's tough. But you found your introduction that way, and then it was kind of like a slippery slope. And isn't that oftentimes how sin works? It's kind of a slippery slope of sorts. It starts with kind of dipping your toe in a little bit, but then sin has this way of gripping us before we realize it, and we go deeper than we ever intended to go, and it just kind of gets control of our lives, and that's very much what you're explaining. Can you talk to us a little bit about that process of, all right, how you went from advertisements from JCPenney to having a full out affair? Like, what's that slippery slope feel like and look like in real life?
The way I think of it is, it's like the metaphor of a plant growing.
Okay.
I had planted seeds for 10 years. I was planting seeds from maybe about 9 years old to my late teen years. But that's when I met my wife Carrie, who would become my wife Carrie. I was planting seeds, chasing after new and different. As it came to porn, that was a seed. Seeking the attention, whatever attention I could get, even if it wasn't necessarily sexual, but just seeking the attention of a girl, that was planting the seed. Objectifying women in general, even if it was only, air quotes, in my head, that's planting the seed. All these things were planting seeds. And then there were other behavioral things too. I had this part of me that always felt like I could play in the fire, touch the fire, be in the fire, and I'm not going to get burned. I'm too smart. I know how to work the room. I know, like, I can get out. I can get out before I get burned. So,
Sure.
And that was how I drove my car. That was how I acted in general. I had a huge gambling addiction, like all these things. I know I'm jumping around, but so feeling like I can play with fire, not get burned, that was planting a seed, right? All these seeds were being planted, being watered, but there wasn't necessarily a visible plant growing, let alone fruit growing, right? But these root systems were growing in me. And I, to a large degree, did not realize it. That's not an excuse. That's the truth.
Right.
Because I was always shy around girls, never shy around other people, but I was always shy around girls my age. I always felt like I was ugly. Girls wouldn't like me, so I was very insecure.
Yeah.
And again, even though I don't view it as a bad thing, but it is what it is. We were pretty sheltered. So, I wasn't going to parties. We weren't having girls come over and hang out at the house, that kind of thing. It was pretty rare. With sports, and then some there were some girls that at our church, that kind of thing. But we lived in an area where there weren't a lot of neighbors. The only neighbors that had kids were a couple of boys. So there just wasn't a lot of opportunities to be around girls my age.
Sure.
Up until Houston, honestly, it was like that's why that was such a pivotal experience in that way. So all these seeds being planted, but nothing visible to me. And then when I met my wife, Carrie, within a few months, I got into the car business. And I'm not blaming anything on the car business. I took my steps. I made my choices. But it's not a very healthy environment in general. And what happened there was I had been planting these seeds, right? And I'd been grooming, without even realizing it, grooming myself in these ways. And now I'm in an environment where I'm meeting people every day. Every day I'm meeting new people. To a large degree, I'm building relationships with people. And I was good at selling cars, not because I was the smartest person when it came to cars, not because I was the slickest salesman, but I was always good at connecting with people. I was always good at building trust and building rapport. And so now I want attention from girls. That's always been the case. But now I can get attention from a female that is trying to buy a car from me or whatever.
Right.
I always wanted to objectify women. Well, now there's, I'm seeing different women every day. All these things, new and different. Well, I'm meeting new and different people every single day.
Right.
And pretty quickly, I realized the highs that I could get from chasing after that with real humans in front of me. And again, it wasn't always the same. Sometimes it would be a physical, sexual connection. And then other times it would be just texting, and it never went beyond there. I would take whatever I could get. I would go fishing and nothing there. Okay, I'm going to move on to somebody else. I'm going to move on to something else. So, I started selling cars August of 2010. We got married June 4th, 2011. when I said I do to Carrie, I'd already cheated on her multiple times. Every time I hated that I did it. Every time I felt terrible about it. But then it happened again. I did it again. Because I was just, my MO had become, I was going to chase after and take whatever I could get. I was a predator. I was an absolute predator.
Wow.
And I've gotten pushback on that word, and I'm going to use that word because that's what I was. That's how I treated people around me. What can you do for me? And 6 months after I got married, I confessed to Carrie that I had been sexually unfaithful. To some extent, there was a thought or a feeling that like this was repentance. Like I did feel when I wrote that letter, I didn't think of it like I'm just doing this to feel better. I did think of it like, okay, well, I'm done. I'm never going to do it again.
Yeah.
Even though my behavioral infrastructure didn't change, so it was foolish to think that I'm just going to flip a switch and just stop. I'd built up these habits for years, and I had been playing out these habits at that point for about a year. But I wrote this letter and confessed her. Well, then that started a trend of basically from then on out, the next several years, every time I would have a sexual affair. So I wouldn't confess porn. I wouldn't confess flirting. I wouldn't confess that stuff. But when I would have a physical affair, I would then feel so much shame. It was like it was overflowing. And then I would tell Carrie. So she's getting hit with these staggered confessions, the worst things a wife can hear, right? Well, she's in survival mode because remember, we've got 4 little kids. I mean, 1 and then 2, 4 kids in 5 years. So she's got babies she's taking care of. I'm coming home from work, and then every 6 months or whatever it is, I'm hitting her with another of these just horror show stories. And that continued for several years. I did everything I could to live a double life, and generally, for lack of a better word, succeeded. I was very, very careful. I mean, there's always this juxtaposition here of even going back to my childhood. I've always been very risk adverse, even though I wanted to play in the fire and take the risks. There was always this combination of like, I want to do these crazy risky things, but I'm going to do them in a way that I can control when I can pull back. That's how I thought of it. And so even like with my addiction, I mean, I worked in Anchorage, Alaska, which is where I grew up, even though shortly after I got married, we moved to Wasilla, which is an hour north. I never had an affair in Wasilla. It was always in Anchorage. My behaviors were almost completely localized geographically to Anchorage. I would go home and I would like, try to like train myself. Like, okay, now I'm dad Logan. I'm husband Logan. And then I go back to work. So this whole mess just continued for several years until the summer of 2015. And my wife, Carrie, gave me an ultimatum. She said, all right, I had another affair. She goes, all right, if you don't make some serious change, then I'm gone. And you're going to lose me. You're going to lose your boys. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but that did scare me. I believed her. So that was the summer of 15. My sobriety date's May 19th of 2016. So almost a year before there was real traction. I did not have a sexual affair again, but still very much struggled with porn, still very much, went in and out of, inappropriate flirting and that kind of thing. But I started to do some things. And that's super weak verbiage, but it's accurate verbiage. I started going to some meetings. I started putting myself out there to some people, some resources. It wasn't until March of 2016, though. I met a guy actually at a Celebrate Recovery a couple months earlier, which is, it's a faith-based, Christ-based recovery group. But at that group earlier, so this is like maybe January of 2016, he's like, hey, I'm glad you're here. You need more than this. You need more than what this group has to offer. That's literally what he told me, and it definitely was true. So he told me about this group called Prodigals. He's like, you should come to a group with me. He's like, that's what I needed. And this was a man who, as I came to find out, I mean, he had decades of sexual addiction. And at that point, I could be off by a couple years, but at that point, he probably had 8 to 10 years of healthy living. So after a while of pushing him off, I finally went, just to appease him, I went to a Prodigals meeting with him. But through that Prodigals group, I got to meet I mean, that night and then other nights, I got to meet like 15, 20 guys that had my story and had years of healthy living. Like not just sobriety, but these guys had like restored lives. Most of them had restored marriages, not all. Most of them had restored marriages. These were dudes that just, they weren't perfect, but they were healthy.
Wow.
You know, you sit down and talk with them, you have no clue that these guys were predators, that these guys used to be monsters like me, that these guys used to just live these evil double lives. Their lives had been completely ripped apart and transformed and rebuilt.
Wow.
And to give you the very aerial version, you know, God did that for me. Through this program. So the Prodigals is a weekly group. Anyone can go to that group as long as you're willing to say you're a man. It is men only. And I am here to work on sexual addiction. If you're willing to say those words, you're welcome at the group. But then there's a Prodigals mentorship program that is an elective program. And it's basically a 2-year, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but 2-year voluntary house arrest.
Wow.
And it's a Christ-based program. So it absolutely centers around scripture and what the Bible says and my relationship with Christ. It's also completely centered on or built on science and how my brain works and how to rewire the neural pathways that God built into my brain and how my body works, right? And so it's this beautiful marriage of God and spirituality and science, which is, I mean, we could do a series of podcasts on just some of the terrible advice that comes from the church oftentimes. It's just like, have more faith, pray better, pray more, you know, read more verses about lust, like just do more stuff. And none of those things are bad. But at some point, you know, there's that story of the guy in the flood, and he's like sitting atop his house and a boat comes by and he's like, I'm going to rescue you. No, I'm waiting on God. And then another boat comes by. No, I'm waiting on God. God's like, these people, I'm sending them to help you. That's what this recovery program was. Like, yes, it's about concrete, tangible tools and healthy tips and habit forming, but it's also completely centered around Christ too. It's both things together.
Yeah. And, you know, faith and science, those things our culture likes to tell us are mutually exclusive.
Right.
However, that's where my worlds meet. I'm a pastor and I'm a pharmacist. And so I see that every day, and I love that. I really think that that's the key to healing is when you combine those
science?
two things.
If we believe that God created the universe, right?
Yeah, right. And, you know, those habit formation concepts are great, you know, brain science. And I'm all about that. And I love learning about that. But who made our brains? You know, who made us that way? Just because science discovered that it works this way doesn't mean God's not behind it.
Right.
So I love that. And, you know, I love hearing your story about how you realized that there were other people like you.
That was the key.
Yeah. You know, so if you're listening to this and you think, you know, the thing about really a lot of sins, but specifically sexual sins, is that there's this temptation for us to become isolated. We don't talk about that a whole lot in society. There seems to be the stigma that goes along with it. So we don't want to, you know, we don't want to share it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to, you know, include ourselves in that group. But, you know, just some quick stats that I've come across. Over 40 million Americans regularly visit porn sites. 40 million. That's incredible. 35% of all internet downloads are related to pornography. Over a third.
Wow.
That's crazy. And then, you know, thinking about, all right, the next generation, thinking about teens and young adults. Ages 13 to 24. This came from Covenant Eyes, which is a program,
really
kind of an accountability program to help people overcome porn addiction, that kind of thing. But one of the stats they said that blew me away was that teens and young adults ages 13 to 24 today feel like not recycling is worse than viewing pornography. Now, I'm not saying don't recycle.
Right.
But I'm saying in the grand scheme of morality here, which is more harmful, you know, a lot of teens and young adults will say, well, not recycling. So don't be so isolated. Realize that there are people all around who are struggling with this. And there's power in realizing you are not alone.
I knew, of course, that, other people looked at porn. I knew that other people had cheated on their wives. I truly didn't know. I did not fathom that it was possible for God to restore my life. It was this disgusting, rotten, dying mess. And honestly, even revive it, which is a heck of a thing to say, but I really didn't think that it was possible, let alone completely create a new creature out of it. And when I say new creature, I'm talking my life, my wife's life, because she got into recovery for her own healing, for sexual betrayal trauma, which is that's a whole other piece to this that's not often known about. And then our marriage and our family. I mean, the 3 different stories that are all, of course, connected, but they're all their own stories. And it's an incredibly beautiful thing that God has done. I didn't think it was possible.
I'm reminded that Scripture tells us that He can do more than we ever dream or imagine. So I think, one of the key steps is, realize you're not alone. But another key step is realize, hey, God can use this. God can deliver you. God can revive you. God can restore you. He in anything He does for one of us, He can do to the rest of us. And so, your story is so bright because it shows us what's possible when we let God have His way. So I want to focus a little more on that transformation. Number one, why do you think it's so important that it's Christ based? Because there's all kinds of self-help things out there.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of neuroscience books out there, but one of the things that really changed things for you was, there's the science aspect, and that's really how our bodies work. But then there's also the faith aspect. So can you walk through that and how that was instrumental, and how, really kind of your relationship with God is what allowed that transformation and that revival and that restoration to happen?
Yeah. For whatever reason, I mean, I'll preface this with the obvious disclaimer that, I'm not a theologian. I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm not an expert on God or how God works.
And that's okay, brother. You have a story, and I'm a big believer, and our stories are meant to help other people. So
I would just say, on one hand, like I was just asked on a podcast the other day, hey, can somebody take the, like the 12 steps, they mention God. I mean, at least the original versions, can you take those 12 steps and then literally just, take God out, put something else in, and can they be beneficial? Which newsflash, that's what happens in most recovery groups nowadays.
Right.
Higher power is your dad or your mom or a doorknob or the sun or whatever. And my answer to that was, yeah, they can be beneficial. Absolutely. Like the 12 steps, there's a lot of wisdom there. It's just like, a wise person, like Jordan Peterson's like the ultimate example of this. A wise person can look at the Scripture and go, there's a lot of wisdom here. Right.
Right.
So yeah, the 12 steps, which were formed on scriptural truths, they were formed by Christian men.
Right.
They can be very beneficial for someone to get sober, to work on things. I don't want to just get sober. I don't want to, which again, like there was a point in my life where I didn't even think that would have been like this ultimate goal. But now looking back, I was like, I don't want to just get sober. Yeah. I don't want to just work on things. I don't want to just have better habits.
Wow.
I want to heal. I want to have a life where, you use the word thrive. I want to thrive. I want to have purpose in life. I don't see how any of that is possible without Christ.
Wow.
If I believe that God created the universe and God put me here for a reason, then me doing anything, whether it's being sober or leading a recovery ministry, whatever, me doing any of that and denying the existence of the creator of the universe, it's futile. And it's so limited. So,
yeah.
This was this is the opposite conversation. At least it started with this other podcast. This is a guy that, doesn't believe in God. Right. And I wasn't there to preach or convince his audience of anything, but I absolutely believe that truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And true transformation, true healing is only going to come through a relationship with Christ and through a program that is centered on that relationship with Christ.
There's a big difference between behavior modification and thriving.
Right.
And I think you hit on that, man. That was That was well put. So what advice would you give to somebody who may be listening to this and finding themselves, all right, I'm struggling with this, I'm looking at porn, or I'm, playing around with having an affair, or I'm having an affair, whatever the case may be. I think I may be, addicted to sex, addicted to porn. I feel like I can control it, and then I can't. What would be the advice you have for our listeners maybe stuck in that trap, for how to overcome that and how to be able to reach that point where they're no longer struggling with it, but they're not just changing their behavior, they're now thriving, they're transformed?
Depending on where that person's at. So if you're a man listening and you're somewhere on that spectrum,
mm-hmm.
Maybe you have doubts about whether or not you struggle. Maybe you have, but I'll speak to the man that was me at 25 years old. While everything was super unhealthy, I was completely broken. I mean, I was desperate.
Right.
Like when I got that ultimatum, I was broken and desperate. So if you're that person, if you're broken and desperate, and you're like, I don't know how the heck to get out of this cave, but I don't want to be in this cave anymore if I can help it. Okay, well, I mean, you not because of Logan Hufford, but I mean, I represent one of a lot of lives that God has transformed.
Yeah.
I can literally, if it weren't for anonymity, I could literally spout off a few dozen names right now of men who had similar stories to myself who have transformed lives.
Yeah.
So it's possible. So you don't have an excuse. I mean, seek resources. There are resources out there. Folks can, I mean, I'm only me, and I don't do this for a living, but I want to do whatever I can to reach a hand into the pit, even if it's get on a quick phone call and pointing somebody to resources. So, I mean, you can, find me on Instagram and send me a message. Check out my content there. I speak directly to this. That's what the Instagram is for. It's not my personal page. It's all about sexual addiction recovery. Depending on where you live, there might be certain groups or not, but there are resources available.
Yeah.
There are Christian sexual addiction therapists. I didn't even think that was a thing.
Yeah.
There are Christian sexual betrayal trauma therapists for women.
Yeah.
Like there are resources available.
Right. Right.
So I at least want to let's rip off the cloak of, I don't think there's help. Help is out there.
Yeah.
It depends on how bad somebody wants it.
And there's hope in understanding that you don't have to stay stuck in that cave.
Right.
A lot of times we just think, well, this is the way I am, and I'm just going to have to deal with it. This is the way I am. It's just the way that God made me. No, God didn't make you to be broken and in this dark place. He made you to thrive.
Yeah.
He made you to live abundantly. And so there is hope available. You do not have to stay stuck. And that speaks for whatever you're dealing with, but particularly today, it talks about sexual addiction. You don't have to stay stuck. There is hope. Logan's Exhibit A of many, many, many dozens and hundreds of more that have received healing, received restoration. And brother, I appreciate you being vulnerable and just sharing that story with us today. There's so many more questions I have. Maybe we can do this again sometime, but even digging into the flip side of, what does that betrayal look like, and that sort of thing. But man, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate the message you're putting out there and the difference you're making in this world. It really is enlightening. It's very encouraging to hear someone who has been to the pits of despair and has come out the other side. And praise be to God, he's still in that business today. Yeah. And so I love it. If my listeners want to reach out to you, you mentioned your Instagram page. Any other resources you have for?
Yeah, so there are some other resources that I can put out in terms of some tools for education. My Instagram is at no longer in bondage. There's periods in between the words, no longer in bondage. Of course, Logan Hufford, got my name. So please check that out. I put out consistent 2 to 3 videos a day.
Okay.
Most of it is directly towards this issue of sexual addiction recovery for a man. some of it might touch on sexual betrayal, and then also, if you're someone who maybe you don't struggle, but you would like to understand this better, a lot of my videos touch on that too, because you might be a pastor, you might be a dad, you might be a wife, you might be a sister-in-law of some. I promise you, every single person listening, you have people in your circle that struggle with this, even if you are not, you're blessed to not struggle with it. So, but I truly would just say, because I'm doing this to try to give hope, check that out. I think you'll benefit from it if you want to understand this better. But I mean, also, if you have a question, shoot me a message on Instagram or comment on a video, and we can talk about it. If you have a question about something, if you want to jump on a phone call and talk about something, get pointed in the right direction, please do so. Just reach out.
That's quite generous of you. Thank you, brother. And I'll put the links to all those things in the show notes as well. But
sounds good.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the work you're doing in this world. I appreciate the light that you're sharing to help people come out of the darkness. And man, what a pleasure this has been. Appreciate the conversation, man.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you for listening to the Rev Rx Podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.